observation, perhaps question for all four of you with regard to the Southern question. And the one question comes from the 17th century and the other from the 19th. And I was wondering, this is a question based on my ignorance, so which is to say it's not going to be adequately formulated. But I was wondering what the pressure of the Masaniello fishermen, the uprising in Naples in the 17th century was, as it continues, what its legacy was in Italy. Because the news of the uprising spread very fast to the north. There was a Baroque Trauerspiel, or play of the morning, a very long one, they called Masaniello. And more intricately and fascinatingly was Spinoza's only self-portrait, in which he dressed in the garb of Masaniello. So that's the question basically is what was the legacy of that on your work, if any? And the second, the 19th century question regards the way the British depicted in the 19th century various uprisings of the Irish. And one argument was that they were descended from the apes more quickly than were the British, who were, according to one argument, were not descended from the apes at all. And that included charges that the Irish were committing cannibalism. So that those were the two just sort of observations, perhaps questions. I guess the second would regard is there a deep structure that we're talking about that is, at least within Europe, transnational? Is there a
I will start with the British question because that's something I actually feel quite confident I have something to say about. So I find it very interesting, and it's one of the things that's most interesting about studying 1848 and the uprisings in Europe and the way in which the question of style kind of was shaped in most parts of Europe. And what I find really interesting is that you have a similar rhetoric in different parts of Europe. And in the case of Britain, what was interesting is that they had a lot of influence in the South. And at a certain point, what happened is that as they became more liberal, they tried to influence the South and tell the Bourbons, basically, what you're doing is wrong, and you need to change the way you behave towards the peasants. The economic situation is horrible, and you need to do something about this. And what's interesting, of course, is that the Bourbons went back at them and said, how dare you? And I think there was actually someone, an official correspondent, who said something along the line of, how dare you say this, especially considering what you are doing in Ireland. And this is, well, even Gladstone commented on the situation in Italy very negatively, and that's funny in a way because he didn't really have the moral ground to say something about that. So I'd say it's definitely possible to talk about a general Southern question in the whole of Europe, but what's interesting is how different countries kind of try to gain a moral ground compared to the others, basically going out of their borders and criticizing, especially as far as, well, Italy, a little bit of Greece, Spain is concerned, going there, northern countries went there and said, hey, you're doing something wrong. Well, actually, they had their own problems, and they actually were employing a very similar method. So that would be my 2 cents about this.
So I think, if I could just add, on the topic, I think of this sort of scientific approach to crime and criminality. There were a series of conferences organized in the 1880s, 1990s. I'm sure that Dr. Cristofaro might help me out here. But as far as I've been able to tell, since my own research only touches upon this tangentially, is that there was an outright confrontation between Italian theorists of crime and criminality and French theorists of crime and criminality. So the French school was much more focused on sort of social causes of crime, whereas the Italian school was very much preoccupied with this idea of biological determinism Although there was a lot of overlap between the two, but sort of, I guess, nationalist chauvinism really entrenched the position of both schools once they actually got together to talk about their various opinions. But I think that there was, at the time, sort of general European preoccupation with degeneration, with crime, and with what goes into creating crime for society.
Yes, to add very quickly something on the same thing. Well, I quoted before the 1975 course from by Michel Foucault, The Abnormal. But if we read the following year course, the title was "Society Must Be Defended for the Fall of la Société." That course is totally devoted to this argument. War and races, and the war of races. And he considers the theme as a theme present, politically present in history of France, was Franco-Gallia, then England, and at the end of the course also Italy with the positivistic school. What changes is, and it's not a secondary fact, secondary matter, is that when we confront with Lombroso, Ferri, Cristofaro, and so on, we have some social scientists who tend to give to all this vision a very objective stand. So they use objective measures. They take the cranium, they take the physical anatomy, and they try not to make a rhetorical speech about what is modern and what is atavistic. You said before the Irish came down from the apes. Yes, it's the same argument used by Lombroso when he says that a criminal man is atavistic. He says the same thing. It is the ring that connects a normal person to our progenitors. So it's the same field of observations, but just which is very important in a scientific standpoint. They add this philosophy, this positivistic philosophy. But we don't produce arguments, we produce mesurations. We have technical instruments to say that the criminal man is the lacking ring between ape and man, for instance. Okay, this is news.
I guess to address your question about the Massanello uprising, I don't, as far as my research is concerned, I haven't found anything in either the writing of Cani or Guttuso that points to influences of the iconography of that event. However, based on my studies as an early modernist, I think the language of uprising in particular is very potent and important in terms of studying campanilismo and regional stylistic vocabularies, so to speak. So I don't think it was something that was necessarily conscious, but I'm sure it factored into those decisions in some way or another. In regards to the question of race, that was something that Guttuso didn't really engage that much with, but Cali certainly did. He said he felt Italian before anything else. And so he was very self-conscious of these racial laws and these discussions happening regarding positivism. So in that respect, I would say it affected Cadi's work for sure.
So if I could just add something on the topic, that would be completely pertinent. But it seems like there's been resurgence of the popularity of Masaniello as an icon in Naples since the 1970s, I would say. So actually, there's lots of songs being written in sort of popular style, which talk about the tale of Masaniello, and he also appears in modern rap songs or pop songs. So it's interesting to think that he's being recuperated in its attempt to shape a new multicultural identity, which we've been seeing since, I would say, 1970s.
So I have a question. This is a term that came up in Caroline's presentation. You were saying about the deforming technique that they said Gattuso, Galli had. Yeah, so that Galli was using. But then I was interested in that term in relation to all of your presentations, because in a way, this deforming technique is basically what legitimized and formed the idea of nation, also unification, and so in a way, so because we were talking about crime, phrenology, let's say, and aristocracy, thinking this opposite term. So I was just wondering if we could think of kind of the opposite technique, and how do you, like one of you or some of you see it, if we could think not only of a deforming technique, but a deform technique. So how do you, I don't know if you could think of that movement, because I'm trying to see.
That's a great question. Paghi frequently expressed his interest in exploring, quote, myths of origins. That was something that he was fascinated with throughout the entirety of his career. That's why he spent a lot of time in Pompeii. Obviously the wall painting was very sophisticated that they were doing in the 1st century AD, but he was actually trying to create a style that looked sort of primitive, because he felt that that was the best way to get to the heart of the formation of the Italian people, because he really did see Italy as Italy and not himself as separate as a Southerner or a Jew. That was a label that was sort of put on him. So that was something that I think must have been very painful for him to read, because he wasn't trying to, I think, make Italians look inferior. He was simply trying to get at the origins of Italy. He was trying to, I guess, fit into that neat fascist trajectory and narrative that they were promoting at the Triennale that year.
So much of the question of sort of what was a fascist style, what is a Jewish style, was being made up on the spot, and so this, what became enttartet the Kunst, or what gets pushed out as deformed is sometimes then gets recuperated as form, so it's very fluid. But I mean, also, maybe for all of you, this question, Christina's question, also makes me think about the status of regionalism as a style, where is it possible that regionalism itself gets somehow conflated with the South? And I'm thinking of Gattuso, for example. He was Sicilian, but he was taken up by some figures in neorealism to be the kind of visual style of the rice paddies in Piedmont, in bitter rice, or he was taken up by writers around looking for an authentic Italian landscape in the post-war period. So where again we see where there's not a particular iconography, there's a kind of melding of terms, and I wonder if regionalism then somehow becomes a term for what is other from the North, say, or what is other from the form. Or does the term regionalism become important for anyone?
So I think perhaps we could briefly talk about the Lega-Nord, which is English for me. I think the most developed political movement right now, which is espousing regionalism, is the Northern League, which is advocating separation of the group from what they see as a corrupt center itself. And I think it's perhaps telling that they seem to have problems to define the regionalism that they're espousing. And there's been a spate of publication in recent years trying to discuss how Lega Nord came about and what kind of political identity they were trying to create. And it's I think telling that that political identity is created more by distancing others rather than to sort of recuperating any sort of cultural identity. Perhaps because the territories that are in which they get off are strongest. I mean, there are cultural diverse too. Piedmont isn't Lombardy, and the Friuli Venezia Giulia is probably different from the rest of the north. So that's perhaps something we might think about.
So can we say that any kind of regionalism is actually nothing more than deformation? So because you're departing from, because if you're looking at something like the Lega Nord or the South, I think the problem is that you have to identify what's your canon, what's your norm in that case, because if you don't have a norm, then you can't really talk about the different nations. So if we talk about the Lega Nord, what would be the norm? Would that be the South, Italy in general, Northern Italy at large? And if we talk about the South, what is the norm again? Are we talking Italy as a broader concept, the idea of Italy that people like, I don't know, the literati in the 18th century had, or are we talking about the North, Piedmont? So I think that's probably one talks about deforming something, that everything can be portrayed as a deformation unless you have a very clear idea of what's the norm that you're departing from.
Yes, I have something like a follow-up observation about regionalism, but it's a bit more focused in a sense. So it's true that the Sicilian Carretti and the Opera dei Pu partake in Sicilian regionalism, but the narrative and visual matter of this regionalism is, of course, tied to the history, to the medieval history of Sicily and the contact with the powers, with the Arab power, but it's mainly made of texts from the north, and Carlo Magno is not extremely Sicilian, and all the other knights are. So it's true that we have these, since we speak about ideas of the South, or ideas of South, we have this kind of territorialization of Sicily in terms of regionalism on something that is suddenly the meaning of the North and the South, in a sense, but based on a textuality and a narrative and a visual material that is really coming from the North. Even though Italian poetry certainly originates in some respect in the Sicilian front with the sonnet and the prehistory of the Florentine school and the Tuscan school. So I mean, we have this kind of typical Southern regionalism that is really about the North as well. So what can we do with that? Can we do something about that? Or with it?
I think that goes back to your point, Margherita, about who decides the norm. What is the norm? And I don't know if we really have an answer to that. I think it very much depends on who you talk to. Yeah.
But what I would say, I mean, if you speak about regionalism, you are under the idea that there is a specificity to your region. A huge part of the specificity of Sicilian regionalism is about something that doesn't happen in Sicily, and that doesn't involve Sicilian people. Not the same. I mean, you don't have the exact same structure in French regionalism in the 19th century, for instance, and the whole movement with Frédéric Mistral and the Occitan movement that will go back, that will go until the World War II, through Charles Maurras and the far right, and you have there a kind of exaltation of the indigenous genius of the South. But that's not so much what is at stake with this reinvention of Sicily through the narrative.
If you put it,
Or it's
on the
indirect.
path, it doesn't involve Sicilian people. Most of Sicilian history doesn't involve Sicilian people, because it's a history of civilizations that come from abroad.
Sure, but
So in many cases,
you don't have so many
you
normal
could apply the same observation for centuries, and which is something that has been written with a polemical intent by Tommaso Lampedusa, as we know, as been quoted before. Much of our history isn't our history; it doesn't belong to us. So we cannot recognize us as part of a common history, common identity, and so on.
don't we have a much more interesting regionalism when this regionalism is not trying to be indigenous?
I don't know, because also if you set the Middle Age, yes, it's true. Social scholar who dealt with historical anthropology, Pasqualino, it's written about a mixture between French inheritance of French inheritance of table ronde and so on, and Sicilian culture. But in Sicily, we have also hosted one of the most powerful symbolically parts of medieval culture, which is very sacred. So, is it Sicilian or not? And which way you can say yes or no?
I think it might be useful to move away from the south and take another example and see if it fits. Let's look at Scotland, for example, and the idea of Scotland that you would have in the United Kingdom and in Scotland as well and in the rest of the world. Can we say that that idea is completely 100% about Scotland? In a way, I don't think you can, because Scotland, shifting borders, centuries of war with England shaped Scotland and was shaped by it. So I guess that to every regionalism, there is a part of it that's not indigenous, and yeah.
I mean, there's no doubt about that.
There's no
It's
doubt
just
about
that
that.
you have in the energy of regionalism, especially in the 19th century, you have a strong emphasis of what is autochthonous, which you had already in Athens in ancient times. And so the regionalism often goes, or provincialism often goes with an emphasis on something that would be indigenous, even, of course, if it's completely untrue, because we are not indigenous to this. So there's no doubt about that. But the question is, do we have different types of regionalism? Do we have a more synthetic or a more syncretic regionalism, or do we have something that is much more based on the assumption of indigeneity?
My idea would be based on the assumption of indigenous instead of being authentic, 100% indigenous. It's a category, right? A region is a social construction that if we want to talk about it in those terms, and therefore it's an idea, and who decides what that idea is about? Us, someone, the person on the street you talk with, who creates discourse. That's a bigger question, and I think this panel, any panel can ever answer. But since ideas are always shifting, I feel like there is nothing that you can claim it's completely indigenous. There is no idea that's, I don't know, no man is an island, and no idea is 100% pure.
Well, I mean, the regionalism I do see itself, I think, is what you would describe as more syncretic. So, I think you're right to say that there's shifts, but it seems like the shift that has been occurring in the past couple of years is one which has embraced sort of a common Mediterranean culture and positive regionalism as particular interpretations of that Mediterranean culture. I think that there is sort of a sense of a common identità meridionale, which is emerging, which takes into account sort of regional differences between various regions of the south, but also sort of emphasizes the common history they have as parts of the former kingdom, or even as parts of Margherita, of the number of colonies, of Greek colonies in antiquity. So I think you pointed out something that's quite interesting, is that you do see syncretism in regionalism at the time. I think that sets apart the southern regionalism that you aren't seeing from the sort of political regionalism you see in the north of the country.
There's another question?
Oh, Jeff.
I certainly don't want this to be the last intervention.
Well,
but-
it's okay. It's just the beginning of the conference, you're
Right.
okay.
My
You're safe.
question in my comment about the 17th century, the Massanello, was designed to encourage a self-reflexive hermeneutic relationship of us, and I'm not excluding myself, from the question specifically of as scholars, let's say, as historians, to the question of violence, which so informs the Southern question. And what is remarkable to me is the speed with which the Massanello, within a very short time, came to the north with the huge play in German Baroque, which was remarkably the structure, I think, the way the Spartacus uprising was received by, say, Augustine of Hippo, St. Augustine, which was a kind of illicit fascination. That is, a fascination, it has to be condemned, but is such a level of condemnation that there's a clear affirmation at a deeper level. The case of Spinoza is very different because he's taking on he's apparently identifying with Massanello in his self-portrait. I mean, when Marx calls Spinoza the most famous he calls him a Kerl, sort of a guy, a bloke, the most important bloke in history. He's writing in correspondence, he's not explaining it. But he's also affirming without this illicit fascination, the necessity for violence. And the question is, how do we as scholars, when we, in our struggle with objectivity and subjectivity, how do we deal with the specific violence of the Southern question and its cognates?
Roberto, and then we'll relax and we can continue.
This, you can say you disagree with this, but it seems to me that the way in which the Southern question emerges in Lombroso, Sergi, in Verga, Capuana, even more than Roberto, it's not Masaniello that they're thinking about. It's the crowds, it's the popular masses, the peasants that in 1799 blocked the good revolution, that in Bronte blocked the progressive revolution of Garibaldi. So it's they're thinking about, it's a way in which Italian politics develops a very peculiar way to deal with modernity, meaning the access of the masses into politics, by claiming through the trope of the South that the masses should not be let any power, not because they're violent, but because their violence, as you, I think, when you outlined at the end of your presentation, the violence is not the right, the correct one, it's the regressive violence. So this is interesting because this is a sort of
feral violence.
It's a sort of progressive, it's that kind of one wing of the Socialist Party that is developing this discourse. So it's not against the Masaniello violence.
Both Lombroso and Ferry were socialists.
Yeah. So it's a way of it's the fear of the people not being progressive enough. Which is an interesting combination. So you agree with that?